Red Dwarf is a cult British sci-fi comedy show which began in 1988 and is still airing to this day with all of its original cast members, which is quite an achievement in itself, though when I say it's still going today I don't mean in the American sense of a new season every year, more like every 3 or 4 years we'll get 6 new episodes or an extended special. Also, the heyday of Red Dwarf is generally considered to be in the early 90s with the first 6 series, after which most fans are in agreement that the show took a decline in quality, a sentiment I also largely agree with. So with this in mind, we're going to take a look at where the downfall began with the very first episode of Series 7, Tikka to Ride, and see if we can pinpoint what changed and how it went wrong. Now, it's easy to place the blame for why Series 7 doesn't work on the lack of Rimmer, since Chris Barry's character is an integral part of the comedy and even the writers seem to acknowledge that he is basically the one carrying the show, as although Lister is ostensibly the main character, the storylines have generally become more and more Rimmer-centric over time. Due to the actor being unavailable, however, Rimmer is written out of most of Series 7, instead being replaced by an alternate universe version of Lister's love interest, Kochanski. But while his absence is undoubtedly felt, there are clearly deeper issues at play here. Tikka to Ride is in my opinion the superior of the 2 episodes which prominently feature Rimmer, and yet it is still highly flawed. Perhaps the answer might lie in the fact that the writing duo of Rob Grant and Doug Naylor had parted ways, leaving Naylor to helm the series on his own from this point onward. But more on that later. So the finale of Series 6 ended with the crew's shuttlecraft, Starbug, being destroyed by a corrupt version of themselves from the future. This immediately gets resolved in a pre-title monologue from Lister, who explains that the resultant time paradox erased the crew's future selves, making it impossible for any of those events to happen in the first place. The way this is scripted really makes it seem as though the episode is saying, don't worry about that cliffhanger, we're just going to handwave it away with technobabble and wipe the slate clean. Which honestly I would have been okay with. I mean, the show had been on hiatus for 4 years at this point. But strangely, Doug Naylor keeps labouring on the cliffhanger resolution even once the episode gets underway properly, and indeed it becomes a driving force in the plot, as the resultant damage to Starbug from the timelines merging has wiped out the craft's supplies of Indian food, a fact which serves as Lister's main motivation later in the story. We also get some spiel about how dimensional anomalies from the paradox have enlarged Starbug's interior. My only guess as to why this is here is that it's a shorthand way of letting the audience know to expect a return to the less adventure-based storytelling of the first 5 series before the Dwarfers were marooned on their shuttlecraft. But this just raises the question of why we're even still on Starbug if it's just going to be treated in the same way as Red Dwarf. It's another example of the show trying to have its cake and eat it. So faced with the prospect of living without curry, Lister resorts to desperate measures, swapping out mechanoid Crichton's head and removing his guilt chip so that it will allow Lister to use the time drive from the previous episode to travel back to Earth and order 500 curries from an Indian takeaway. Now it's at this point we need to examine the stylistic choices that distinguish Series 7 from what had gone before, and for this we're going to need some context. Thanks to scheduling pressure from the BBC, Series 6 had been something of a production nightmare, with rewrites still going on even as the episodes were being filmed. Once the series had concluded, Rob Grant decided enough was enough and turned his back on Red Dwarf, never to return. His co-writer, on the other hand, not only saw more life in the franchise but wanted to take it to the big screen, and would spend the best part of the next decade trying and failing to get a Red Dwarf movie off the ground. This most likely influenced the overall more cinematic feel of Series 7, with a heavier emphasis on emotional drama over comedy, along with an abundance of CGI special effects and the absence of a live studio audience. Unfortunately, the outcome of this new direction is somewhat hit and miss. For one thing, the CGI has aged terribly, the colour palette in the studio segments looks oversaturated, something which would also plague Series 8, and the dramatic music that gets added over certain scenes is loud and distracting and makes it feel like you're being constantly handheld as opposed to complementing what's on screen. The scene where Lister is removing Crichton's head is a good example of what I'm talking about. Also, I can't help but feel that without the live audience to work off, some of the energy that made the earlier series' humour work is missing. And this last one isn't exactly specific to Tikka to Ride, but where the show decides to draw the line between comedy and emotional drama is weird at times, to say the least. Like, there's an episode later on in which it's revealed that Lister is supposedly his own dad and his love interest is his mum, and for some reason the show expects us to have genuine emotional investment in this ludicrous, implausible concept. I'm sorry, but I don't buy it. Anyway, getting back on the subject of today's episode, the remainder remainder of Tikka to Ride revolves around another time paradox created by the crew inadvertently preventing the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. I feel like Doug Naylor had wanted to tell a story about JFK for some time at this point, with all the references to the man behind the grassy knoll in previous episodes, and for the most part the comedy and drama in this segment is effective. I particularly like Sparehead 3's cartoonish double take upon realising they've landed in the Texas Book Depository where the president was assassinated from. One joke that doesn't particularly land for me is his later line about picking on the chicken as a justification for why humans would eat their own species. I'm sorry, but this makes no sense. In no way is cannibalism logically equivalent to eating another non-sentient form of life. Even as a vegetarian and animal rights advocate, I think this is stupid, but by far the biggest issue of the whole JFK plot is the way it gets resolved. In order to repair the timeline, the Dwarfers get a future version of JFK to assassinate himself from behind the grassy knoll. A funny concept, yes, but remember how at the start of the episode it was established that the crew couldn't have been wiped out by their future selves because their future selves never would have existed. So therefore, by this episode's own time travel logic, it should be impossible for JFK to be killed by his future self. Now, if you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know that I'm not one to get offended when long-running TV shows play fast and loose with continuity, and this especially applies to comedy. For instance, the fact that the time drive can now travel through space, even though the series 6 finale established it could only travel in time, doesn't bother me. However, as a bare minimum, any given story, even if it's in a sci-fi comedy show, should at least be internally consistent with itself, because if you keep moving the goalposts and changing the rules, then nothing that happens has any impact or meaning. Tikka to Ride is the first episode of Red Dwarf to be solely written by Doug Naylor, and it definitely feels like the show is still finding its feet under this new leadership. And with that in mind, it was a bold decision and perhaps a misjudgment to go so experimental so early, with an expanded episode count and a stylistic reinvention of the programme. The fact that Series 7 is unique in having so many co-writers kind of suggests Naylor was struggling to cope with the workload, and with hindsight, his attempt at making Red Dwarf more cinematic really feels like him trying to run before he could walk. This is Midnight Chimes, still waiting for the last train home.